The Odyssey is ultimately a story about coming home. Odysseus has been gone for decades. He's experienced things that most mortals will never experience, and by his own admission, he's made mistakes and done terrible things. But he's also done his best to protect the people that he's in charge of. He's kept the memory of Penelope and his family and his home on Ithaca intact. And like many stories of going home, sometimes when you get home, things are not the way you thought they would be. Things change. People are different. You don't recognize as easily the things that you once did. So what's interesting about Book 17 of the Odyssey is that when Odysseus finally gets home, he gets to see exactly how bad things have gotten in his absence. The lack of good leadership on the island is astounding, and Odysseus is going to see this firsthand. So if we remember from the previous books of the Odyssey, Odysseus has crafted this plan where he's going to disguise himself as a beggar. He's going to send Telemachus ahead to pave the road for him. And once he gets inside of his house, he's going to take the measure of the suitors. He's going to take the measure of Penelope, and he's going to figure out a plan with Telemachus to kill all of the suitors. Now, like we said, Telemachus gets home first. He greets his mom tearfully, and right away we can contrast the Telemachus of earlier in the Odyssey, where he's crying a lot and he doesn't have a lot of confidence, and sometimes he'll speak, but then he'll break down crying. Here, he's much more confident. He tells Penelope what he heard in Sparta about Odysseus, and if we remember, he picked up this friend of his on the way home from Sparta, and this guy apparently is good at prophecies and divining things, and this guy gives a prophecy that Odysseus is coming very soon. And while all that's happening, Odysseus is coming back with Eumaeus to finally get to his house and see what's going on. And again, there are so many good examples that Odysseus is going to run into in this chapter where leadership is bad on the island and things are ugly. In his absence, Ithaca has gone downhill. As Eumaeus and Odysseus are making their way to the palace, they run into the goat herder, another servant of Odysseus's, who sees Odysseus looking like a beggar, and he sees Eumaeus, and this guy just rips Odysseus, really for no other reason than just being a beggar. Here's the taunt from the goat herd, quote, "Here comes one scurvy type leading another. God pairs them off together every time. Swineherd, where are you taking your new pig? That stinking beggar there, liquor of pots. How many doorposts has he rubbed his back on, whining for garbage, where a noble guest would raid a cauldron or a sword? Hand him over to me. I'll make a farmhand of him, a stall scraper, a fodder carrier. Whey for drink will put good muscle on his shank. No chance. He learned his dodges long ago. No honest sweat. He'd rather tramp the country begging to keep his hoggish belly full. Well, I can tell you this for sure. In King Odysseus's hall, if he goes there, footstools will fly around his head. Good shots from strong hands. Back and side, his ribs will catch it on the way out." End quote. This guy then kicks Odysseus as he's walking by for good measure. And we can really see the cruelty and the animosity here towards the lowest members of society by this swineherd. He's calling Odysseus garbage and comparing him to farm animals, and he's saying he's going to sell him into slavery. Just terrible stuff. And this is now the type of thing that seems to be on the menu while the suitors are vying for the leadership of Ithaca. Odysseus moves on and he reaches the palace and the doors outside. And in one of the saddest moments of the Odyssey, he comes across one of his old dogs. The dog was just a puppy when Odysseus left for the Trojan War, and he's 20 years old now and an old dog. And the dog is just sitting in filth. And he recognizes Odysseus, but he doesn't have the strength to get up and run to him like any dog would when he sees its owner, especially after a long time. Anyone who has a dog can identify with this, and just the poor and cruel treatment of animals for no reason, again, gives us insight into the suitor's character, and it gives us insight into, again, how bad things have gotten without Odysseus to lead this island. Of course, we know that the leadership here is bad because in the Odyssey itself, in Homer's world, we are meant to contrast this state of affairs with some of the proper ways that the Greeks are supposed to behave in leadership positions. So we've seen this with King Nestor that Telemachus visited. We've seen it with King Menelaus. We've seen it when Odysseus visited the Phaeacians and King Alcinous. To a lesser extent, we see it with Calypso and even with Circe once Odysseus kind of figures out how not to get his men killed and turned into pigs. And so there's a very particular way that leaders are supposed to behave. And dogs lying in filth and people insulting migrants and beggars on the street, the lowest members of society. This is not how things were in Sparta. It's not how things were with the Phaeacians. And Odysseus doesn't like this at all. Eumaeus has a line where he says, quote, "You know how servants are. Without a master, they have no will to labor or to excel." End quote. I think in the modern day, we might hear something like that and think, oh, a servant or a slave is in a terrible position, and we would rightfully recoil from that. But I think what Homer is trying to do here is he's trying to show people that people need to be inspired and people need an ideal to aspire to, whether that's servants in a palace or citizens in a country. Sometimes we need systems and rules in place by wise leadership that allows us to be our best selves. And if we don't have that, it's easy to be less than our best self. The suitors are not inspiring anybody to be better. In fact, they don't care about the common man at all. And we can now see the type of society that they are fostering. After the incident with the dog, Odysseus does make it into the hall to beg. And again, really, this is a stealth operation. He's trying to suss out what kind of people are these suitors, and is anyone still loyal to me of the servants and slaves in my house? And maybe are any of these suitors worth a damn, or are they all beyond the pale? So classic Odysseus, the begging is a ruse to get up close and personal with the suitors and see what they're all about. Odysseus, the great tactician, right? And if we remember, there are sort of two lead suitors. One guy by the name of Antinous and another guy by the name of Eurymachus. So right away, Antinous treats Odysseus terribly. Telemachus steps up and calls him out on this poor treatment, but it doesn't really stop Antinous from behaving like a jerk. Antinous is calling Odysseus a rat, a forager, a pest, a scarecrow. He calls Eumaeus a breeder of pigs. And it's hard not to note the language here. There is some dehumanization that we often associate with more modern tragedies and horrors, but there's clearly some elements of that that are present in this ancient Greek Homeric world as well. Antinous and his suitors are comparing migrants and homeless people with pests and farm animals. And of course, this makes it easier to not show any empathy and keep these people on the lowest rungs of society. In response to all of this, Eumaeus, Odysseus's one loyal friend at this point, makes a great point, which is that criticizing the beggar for begging or the homeless person for being homeless is philosophically stupid. The refugee or the migrant comes because they have to, not because they were invited. So again, treating the homeless man poorly because he's homeless says more about your character as a person than it does about the homeless man's character. And in the Homeric world here, this is a violation of guest right, and it's a flaw in leadership. At a certain point, Odysseus walks around to beg for food from each of the suitors, and Antinous is the only one not to give Odysseus any scraps from his plate. They exchange words. Odysseus is critical of Antinous's lack of kingly aura and generosity, and Antinous ends up throwing his footstool at Odysseus. This is a violent act that foreshadows some of the violence to come. Antinous actually gets reproached for that by the other suitors, who basically tell him, hey, calm down. And the other suitors do give Odysseus food, but they're only doing it because they're worried that he might be some sort of god in disguise, which seems to happen a lot in this Greek world, and actually kind of is on the trail of being correct, that he is in disguise and he has the backing of at least one god, maybe two. So this is almost the ancient Greek equivalent of what's called Pascal's wager. Pascal's wager is more of a modern justification or reason to believe in God. And the wager is basically that you should believe in God because the reward, if you are correct in believing in God, is much greater than the penalty for not believing in God. In other words, if you believe in God and God turns out to be real, then you're going to be rewarded eternally. If he turns out not to be real, then you don't lose anything. So there's a lot of theological debate about something like Pascal's wager, but most people see it as, if that's your only reason to believe in something or to help someone, then you're actually not helping for the right reason. You're helping, in this case, Odysseus, disguised as a beggar. You're helping for your own advantage and your own reasons. You're not helping for the advantage of the people who need it, which is what a true king would do. Eventually, as things are getting heated and Odysseus and Antinous are exchanging words, Penelope comes into the hall and she wants to meet this new migrant who has come from far away and see if he has any news of Odysseus. Odysseus delays it a little bit and says he'll do it at night when the suitors calm down. And just like that, the stage is set for Odysseus and Penelope to finally get together, although, again, Odysseus will be in disguise. Later on, Odysseus bumps into Iris, another beggar, and this guy is almost just as bad as the suitors. So even the beggars are treating people terribly. So Iris starts insulting Odysseus. The suitors catch on and they're egging Iris on. Odysseus is defending himself a little bit, and soon we have a winner-take-all fight on our hands between this other beggar, Iris, and Odysseus. It seems like Homer might be saying that just like there's a right and a wrong way to be a leader, there might be a right and a wrong way to be a guest. So the idea of guest right doesn't just encapsulate the host, it encapsulates the guest too. And there's a certain way that you're supposed to behave as a guest in somebody else's house. And I think it's clear that Iris is breaking this code. As Odysseus is getting ready for the big fight with Iris here, he takes off his cloak and reveals his chiseled body. So despite the shipwrecks and the wanderings and the lack of nutrition and exercise, Athena has helped Odysseus maintain his shape, and he's totally jacked. Everybody in the room is shocked, most of all the suitors, and once they see this, they start changing their tune a little bit, and instead of now rooting for Iris, they start shifting. In one of the funniest lines of the Odyssey that is in the Fitzgerald translation, but not the Emily Wilson translation, one of the suitors says, "By God, old Iris now retires." But there's nothing funny about Antinous' treatment of people that he considers lesser than him. And once he realizes Iris is going to lose, he jumps on the bandwagon and says he's going to sell Iris into slavery if he loses. So the cruelty here is real. He says, quote, "Ha ha, you big show-off. You would be better dead than so afraid of some old man worn down by suffering. If this man beats you, proving he is stronger, I will toss you on board a ship and send you off to King Echetus in mainland Greece, the lord of cruelty and pain. He will cut off your nose and ears with pitiless bronze, and then your genitals, and he will give them raw to his dogs to eat." End quote. Again, if you're keeping track here, Antinous largely is responsible for this fight happening in the first place by egging on Iris and Odysseus as well. He treats them terribly, and then when they get into a situation that he caused, he says he's going to sell at least one of them into slavery. At any rate, Odysseus takes it easy on the guy, but he totally dismantles Iris and breaks his jaw, and that's the end of Iris. He goes back outside and presumably lives the rest of his life as a beggar. Odysseus, the great tactician, didn't want to reveal his full strength by completely destroying Iris, but he allows him to keep his life and continue begging. Odysseus then gets more food and drink from the suitors, who seem a little bit more impressed with him. One guy named Amphinomus stops long enough for Odysseus to basically tell him, "Hey kid, you aren't so bad. I knew your dad, and if I knew your dad as well as I think I did, you can't be that bad. So you should go home." Odysseus, very interestingly here, gives him a chance to escape his fate. Odysseus says, quote, "Take note of what I say. Of all the creatures that live and breathe and creep on earth, we humans are weakest. When the gods bestow on us good fortune and our legs are spry and limber, we think that nothing can ever go wrong. But when the gods bring misery and pain, we have to bear our suffering with calm. Our mood depends on what Zeus sends each day. I once had what most people count as wealth, great riches. I committed many crimes of violence, abuses of my power, abetted my brothers and my father. No one should turn away from what is right. A man should quietly accept whatever the gods may give. I see how wickedly the suitors are behaving, wasting wealth and failing to respect the wife of one who will soon come back to his family and homeland. Very soon. May spirits guide you home, so you do not meet him when he comes. When he confronts the suitors in this hall, there will be blood." End quote. Amphinomus, this young kid who's one of the suitors, but again doesn't seem like the worst of them at least, he gets up and he's troubled, and he's thinking about what Odysseus just told him about fate and living life with what the gods have given you. he starts pacing around the hall. But after a while, he goes and he sits in the very same chair that he was sitting in before. And this seems to be symbolic for this roundabout journey where the beginning and the end are the same. Fate or destiny or determinism. Amphinomus's path has been chosen. And so there might be something here about fate and free will. And even though Amphinomus was given this warning by Odysseus, he's not able to escape his fate. And he sits back down in the very chair that he was in before. Eventually, Penelope comes back into the hall, and she's looking beautiful. She chastises the suitors for their behavior with the migrant Odysseus, and she even chastises Telemachus a little bit and says to the suitors, "Why are you behaving this way? And why haven't you brought me any gifts?" Penelope leaves. The suitors totally ignore what she just said, and Eurymachus, the other lead suitor, insults Odysseus some more. Odysseus fires back with a verbal insult, and then Eurymachus fires a missile at him. Again, hints at the violence to come, and now the second of the two lead suitors has thrown a projectile in violence at Odysseus, and it really hints at the violence to come. And really throughout this chapter, Odysseus is telling the suitors exactly what's going to happen. Odysseus is going to walk through that door and you guys are going to be in trouble. Odysseus is going to walk through that main gate and he's going to slaughter everybody. And you guys are behaving like this is not going to happen. Telemachus then allows cooler heads to prevail, convincing the suitors to go home for the night. And as Odysseus is staying in the great hall, tending the fire, waiting for his meeting with Penelope, while the suitors are gone, it turns out that a lot of the house slaves and house servants have been partying with the suitors and sleeping with them. The slave Melantho has been sleeping with the lead suitor Eurymachus, and she's also been insulting Odysseus, who's hanging around and tending the fire. This is another example of a person refusing guest right and not abiding by the standards of hospitality, and Odysseus rips her a new one. But this doesn't stop Melantho and some of the other slave girls from sneaking out of the house at night and going to sleep with the suitors, which Odysseus takes great offense to. Later that night, Odysseus tells Telemachus, "We need to hide the weapons and arms from the suitors. And if they ask us about it, or they ask you about it, you should throw them off the scent a little bit. Maybe be sad about Odysseus not being home, or say, hey, you guys might accidentally kill yourselves in a drunken battle. Sometimes iron itself can draw men's hands." And finally, we get to this meeting between Odysseus and Penelope. To some extent, Odysseus still wants to suss her out a little bit and figure out if she's still been loyal to him. We don't get any inside perspective into Penelope's head, on the other hand, but we do get the sense maybe that she's almost doing the same thing. So Odysseus and Penelope are, in this tactical, strategic way, a very good match for each other. In classic Odysseus fashion, he constructs this ginormous lie about where he came from and how he got here. And as he's talking, Penelope is listening to his story, chiming in now and then, and she's really impressed with this migrant, or whoever this guy is. And she starts telling him about a dream that she had. She says, quote, "Interpret me this dream. From a water's edge, 20 fat geese have come to feed on grain beside my house, and I delight to see them. But now a mountain eagle with great wings and crooked beak storms in to break their necks and strew their bodies here. Away he soars into the bright sky, and I cry aloud, all this in dream. I wail, and round me gather softly braided Achaean women, mourning because the eagle killed my geese. End quote. Penelope then goes on to talk about the dichotomy of a dream, the two sides of dreaming and what it means. On the one hand, a dream is a goal to aspire to, and it's something that you look toward, you're inspired by, it's noble and beautiful and necessary, something that humans have to get them through the darkest times. On the other hand, a dream can be an illusion, a shade, a confusion, a fantasy that can mislead you or trick you. And in the worst case, it can destroy you. Penelope's character is inherently confusing and mysterious, maybe even more so than the great wanderer Odysseus, and we never get insight into her head. But this talk about dreams does give us some insight into what she might be thinking. She stayed loyal to Odysseus for decades. She's held off the suitors for this long. She's raised Telemachus to be the man that he is. She's an incredibly powerful woman and she's done amazing things, but she gives insight into the doubts that must plague her. So obviously the reader will recognize that dream that she described where the eagle is coming to destroy the geese as a prophecy, right? Odysseus is going to come, he's the eagle, and he's going to destroy the suitors who are the geese. On the one hand, Penelope wants to believe this, and she wants this to be a thing, and that hope is something that can comfort and lead you to be your best self. But on the other hand, maybe it's just a shade and it's just an illusion, and believing in it would be foolish. So Penelope is confused and unsure, and again, she's inherently mysterious and in flux. Don't forget that she's still grieving. In the Wilson translation, she can't even say the city of Troy's name. She calls it Ivilium. And this highlights the terrible association that Troy has for her with evil. And it reminds us that, again, a war can be fought overseas. It can be fought by other people, but the ripple effects and the downstream grief that war can bring is always going to be real. Another interesting aspect of Penelope's character here is that in some ways she might be a mirror for Odysseus. So on the surface level, Odysseus is telling the story and he's testing Penelope to see if she's still loyal to him. But there's a lot of readers who think that Penelope actually knows that this migrant, this beggar, is Odysseus. And she's also testing him, seeing how he responds to her stories and tricks and strategizing. And there are some hints here that she might know that this actually is Odysseus. So as Odysseus is meeting with Penelope, she recommends that he get washed by some of her slaves, and Odysseus requests the oldest of the house slaves, a woman by the name of Eurycleia. And the old maid is washing him, and as she's doing that, she recognizes a scar that Odysseus has on his leg that he got when he was a kid. Odysseus tells her to keep quiet, and she promises that she'll do that so she doesn't ruin the whole plan. But anyway, before that, Penelope tells Eurycleia, quote, "Wash your master's age mate," end quote. Age mate meaning someone who's similar in age. But some people think that Penelope might have caught herself talking, and instead of saying, "wash your master's feet," she changed the word feet to age mate. So maybe Penelope did know, and there's these little moments where she catches herself and doesn't reveal it yet. But she does reveal that she's not going to wait any longer to decide on which suitor she's going to select, and she's going to create a contest, and the winner of the contest gets her hand in marriage. So some people think that the fact that she finally is ready to do this contest indicates that she does know this is Odysseus, and it turns out the rules of the contest that she creates are perfectly designed for Odysseus to win. She makes the trial something that he alone can do. Shoot an arrow through 12 axe heads. And before you do this, you have to string Odysseus's bow, which is really hard to do, and she may know that most of the suitors won't be able to do it. The contest is set, and the end game of the Odyssey is in play. As Odysseus is sleeping that night, a bunch of the servants and slaves again are slipping out in the dark of night to go sleep with the suitors. Odysseus is filled with rage at this, but once again he lets his reason govern his passion. Homer says, quote, "His rage held hard in leash, submitted to his mind," end quote. One of the defining aspects of Odysseus is that, generally speaking, he allows his reason to govern his passion. He thinks things through before he acts. And I've mentioned these female slaves slipping out into the night a couple of times now because there is going to be a punishment for this. And we'll get to that in the next couple of books, but it's worth foreshadowing. Is the punishment going to fit the crime? And speaking of crimes, the suitors are preparing for what they don't realize is going to be their last feast. There is some more taunting of Odysseus and Telemachus, and at this point, these guys are just signing their death warrants. For Odysseus, they're all guilty, and they're all going to die. Another guy throws something at Odysseus. This is now at least the third time that Odysseus has had to dodge a violent flying projectile, but he is able to dodge it, and Telemachus has a nice moment where he stands up for his family and his house. Again, this is a very different Telemachus than the Telemachus at the beginning of the story. Telemachus says, quote, "You were very lucky you failed to hit the stranger. He avoided the blow himself. I would have thrust my sword right through your belly, and your father would have held your funeral and not your wedding. So from now on, you all should stay in check here in my house. I used to be a child, but now I understand things, good and bad. I have to watch and put up with all this. The slaughtered sheep, the food, the wine. It is hard for a single man to put a stop to such a multitude. But please back down from your hostility to me. Or if you do still want to kill me with bronze swords, go on. I want you to. It would be better to die than have to watch you suitors acting so horribly, abusing strangers, dragging the house girls through my home, molesting them." End quote. Telemachus finally finding the courage to stand up to these suitors who are courting his mom, treating his servants terribly, eating all his food, drinking his wine, dancing and partying without his permission. And Telemachus very critical also of how they've been treating the beggars and the migrants, for example, Odysseus, who show up at the house. And again, it's hard not to view really one of the primary themes of the Odyssey as this: how do you treat the lowest members of society? How do you treat migrants? How do you treat the poor? How do you treat the homeless? And all of the villains in the story of the Odyssey, in particular the suitors, do a terrible job of providing hospitality, empathy, any sort of assistance or help. Think about Antinous refusing to give Odysseus food and making fun of the beggars Iris and Odysseus and generally treating them like less than human. Meanwhile, all the heroes of the Odyssey do the opposite. They treat guests with respect. They provide food and clothing. Doesn't necessarily mean that they roll out a red carpet and allow guests to abuse their hospitality and allow them to stay at their house forever, but they provide food, they provide shelter, and they help the migrant to get where they need to go. So as the suitors' treatment of people lesser than them is revealed to be increasingly corrupt and bad, as that's happening, the tone of violence and foreboding here of the violence to come is ramping up. We've already said that there's a ton of hints in this section of the Odyssey that violence is coming. Obviously, Penelope's dream of the eagle coming to kill the geese, Telemachus's guy that he picked up on the boat gives that prophecy that Odysseus is coming back. Odysseus at this point has told the suitors that they're going to die very soon. There's lines like this that Homer just throws in there. He says, quote, Telemachus ignored him, and meanwhile, the houseboys drove 100 animals through town for sacrifice. End quote. Well, there just happens to be around 100 suitors, and now you're telling me 100 cattle are being driven to slaughter. Interesting. And as the tone of violence ramps up, there's almost a supernatural element that starts happening at the end of Book 20. Listen to Homer describing the end of the suitors' last feast. Quote, Athena turned the suitors' minds. They laughed unstoppably. They cackled, and they lost control of their own faces. Plates of meat began to drip with blood. Their eyes were full of tears, and they began to wail in grief. The prophet Theoclymenus addressed them. What awful thing is happening to you? Your faces, heads, and bodies are wrapped in the night. Your screams are blazing out like fire. The ornate palace ceilings and the walls are spattered with your blood. The porch is full of ghosts, as is the courtyard, ghosts descending into the dark of Erebus. The sun has vanished from the sky, and gloomy mist is all around. At these words, they all laughed. Eurymachus spoke up. This new arrival has lost his mind. Quick, fellows, throw him out. Make him go to the marketplace. He thinks it is like night in here. The prophet answered, Eurymachus, I will not ask for guides. I have good eyes and ears and feet. My mind is working perfectly, and I am leaving. I sense some evil coming for you all, who sit here in Odysseus's house, tormenting and oppressing other people. Not one of you will get away. End quote. The suitors ignore this prophecy, like they always do, because it comes from someone that they regard as lower than them, and this will be the last time they make that mistake. Book 20 ends quietly and violently forebodingly with Odysseus, Penelope, and Telemachus sitting, listening to the suitors as they insult and debauch one final time. But this time, revenge and vengeance are on the immediate horizon. If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe on Patreon for bonus episodes, video essays, behind-the-scenes content, and other perks. You can also join the Patreon for free to get a monthly recommendations email and a sneak peek at what's up next. You can support in other ways by subscribing and leaving a rating or review in your podcast app, by following on social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, etc., by sharing with a friend, or simply by continuing to listen. You can also sign up for my email newsletter, which has some written pieces and podcast updates every now and then. Links to all of this stuff are in the show notes. Any comments or suggestions you can send to reflectinghistory@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. That's it for now.